Going without?
All right, yeah, technical difficulties. We had a slideshow. We're going to start without it. See what happens.
You might improvise with that.
Might improvise a little bit, but thank you all for coming. We are students from the Conway School.
The Conway School is a 10-month master's degree program in ecological landscape design and planning. It's split into 3 terms with three different projects. So in the fall, we completed a fall project, which was more of a small-scale site design project, and now we're in the winter term, the second term, which is sort of expands to a larger landscape planning project. So we've been graciously brought in by the Abington Planning Board to help update the master plan for the town of Abington. The last time it was completed was in 2009, so this is every 10 years. Now it's 2019, so it's due for an update.
Yep, and so a master plan is essentially a town's vision for its future. It's broken up into 10 different categories, and for Eric and my part in the process, we're going to be drafting the goals and vision statement categories, which is a really community involvement heavy process that is involved in kind of figuring out how the community sees the town moving forward, what are the major goals for the community in the future. And then we're going to be doing land use, which deals with all the various uses of land in the town and looks at zoning and how to kind of direct growth. And then we're also going to be doing a watershed protection section, which is new to the master plan, which really deals with looking at what are the important water resources in Abington, and what are the potential threats to those resources, and then how do we mitigate that to keep Abington's water clean and healthy. And then we're also going to be doing a natural and cultural resources section, which deals with everything from important historic places and events to parks and open spaces and protected areas. And then finally, we're going to be putting together an implementation schedule for how the town can reasonably complete some of the goals laid out in the sections that we've done.
And a month ago, we had an initial community meeting. Can you raise your hand if you were here for that one? Oh, great, so we got a lot of repeat. So we heard a lot of great input about what you thought the strengths and weaknesses and assets and things that could be improved in the town. So today we're going to start off with an activity. Instead of thinking about the way Abington is now, really visioning 20 or 30 years in the future, you have some Post-it notes. And if you have a pen, that's great. If you don't, if you're wearing pens.
I'll hold them out.
And basically, with the Post-it notes, just on each Post-it note, just you can close your eyes. You don't have to close your eyes, but in your mind, just think about taking a walk through Abington in 20 or 30 years, and think about what you see as you walk. What do you see in your mind as the things that in Abington in 20 or 30 years? So take about 5 minutes to do that, and then you'll share with a partner next to you what you saw. And then we'll kind of talk about that and we'll have a little activity.
In Abington in general, or specific parts of Abington?
In all of Abington, but if you have a particular vision about a spot and you want to get specific, it could be general or specific. Just what you see for Abington.
Are we generating a series of Post-it notes?
Yes, yes. Just
So one idea at each note?
yeah, one idea on each.
Do you need more notes?
Me?
We have
Probably.
lots of Post-it notes, so.
Yeah, there's more. And there's some more over there too.
not saying it. They know what they know.
If you want to turn to the person next to you and start sharing some of your ideas, that'd be great.
Come on up.
Rick, how you are?
In a few minutes, we're all gonna get up and come to the front and post them on the wall and start to kind of look for connections and similarities, see some patterns.
Okay. Excuse me. I have a snowball, but I did a lot of shoveling, so I'm like, God, stiff. Okay, I'll show you yours if you'll show me mine. That's all.
Sounds good. So these are not in any particular order.
Yep, me too. This thing on stick. Okay.
So you beat me, you got 8.
Yeah, okay.
So I got increased working class housing options within walking distance of commercial centers or transit hubs.
I think I had affordable housing. Well, it's almost.
Yep.
Yeah.
Family-friendly infrastructure, prioritizing parks, recreational opportunities, walking, biking trails, community events.
Well, I sort of have that. I have a walking, cycling connection between the library offices and Hancock Street, and Island Grove in a good state of repair, and State Park in a good state of repair. So that's good.
Growing commercial tax base fueled by our proximity to 318, 123, 58 are middle-class residential base and smart zoning rules.
Well, I've got redevelopment of Union Point land
Yep.
in Abington that adds the tax. Town centers with commercial on the first floor and residential on the second floor.
Make sure everyone gets a chance to speak.
Guess I should have been more specific.
What do you want us to do after?
Thriving downtowns with an eclectic mix of commercial and retail businesses that's as busy at nighttime as during the day.
Sort
Yep.
of like that.
An expectation that developers try hard.
Well, a couple
personal note.
of things. I had residential neighborhoods connected by pedestrian and bike.
Yes, absolutely.
And I've heard this, that coming to town, it looks like shit. Zoning the town lines, I don't know how we could do that. Whether zoning the town lines with other towns that, with attractive structures and make a good impression when you first enter.
Yeah, I think that's the streetscapes.
Car lots, vaping places, not people have a right to make a living.
But they can have those, but at least make it look nice in the streetscape.
Yeah.
You know, like the guy who came here and said, well, I don't want to put landscaping because people just throw cigarettes out and it catches fire. So they have rocks now in front of his front. I mean, we allowed that.
Yeah. Well, that's what happened at, what is it, the restaurant up there on 123. Of course, why they would put stuff that would burn outside, but that was beyond me. You know.
But
I really think that I'm going to be going to a thing in Brockton tomorrow, day after tomorrow for the Oz. I love the opportunity zones. Brockton has 4 and Bridgewater has 1. But anyway, Rob May, who's the city planner in Brockton, is a big thing about residential on the second floor, commercial on the
I don't know what we can do differently to encourage people to develop in the downtown centers.
Well, I mean, because we did that in North Abington Center. We did the zoning and play, and they say there's no demand for commercial. I mean, you look at the old pictures. I mean,
Sometimes you create demand.
we're not going to have a supermarket. We're not going to have a
If you guys
First
are about
National.
ready, you can take your Post-it notes down here to the front.
And he's getting up again.
Right, yeah.
So it's sort of, and during our situation out there where you are,
You gotta do the groundwork.
there are other roadies and so on.
Yeah, you can post them here, you can post them in your group and try to
Yeah,
even
yeah,
add
there's
to
kind of
it.
I don't know exactly how that works for emergency vehicles, but it's definitely an important thing to think about, especially when you're considering making a place more dense, having space for those services.
And the other thing is, I'd be certainly much in favor of having another walk.
Sorry about that.
That paved some ways. I mean, one of those Stop and Shops on the street, watch people sweat right now, but they take a lot.
Yeah.
On the other hand, we have
Now they're trying to get them to come back in. Yeah, it's interesting the way it kind of happens, and like there's sort of trends and like things that seem like different solutions for different problems, I guess.
What better thing could we do than we're working in a town, you live in a
Definitely a shorter commute.
wage in that town. And then the other thing is, well, no, we just hope that the rail, we can make some cuts and other things, is to get people in and out of Boston. And what's happening with that because that office is full, it isn't anymore because more people have jobs at more single term. They only go in 1,000 days a week, and they do the rest of the week from home. So why that?
Well, there's the reverse commute too. Not everybody goes into town.
We had someone who used to park in the parking lot over there that parked at night. They worked, you know.
A lot of Bridgewater State University students use the commuter rail.
Yeah, you know what happened down there the other day? I got a friend of mine who told me this.
Well, you know, we're working on my office is the town of Bridgewater is interested in relocating a lot from BSU to across from Burger King. That is the 7th busiest commuter rail lot in the system. Yeah.
Wow.
I totally wouldn't have guessed that.
Yeah, all the college kids were parking there.
I see, I have a parking sticker, so I can, as an alumni.
I got a ticket down there for parking. I was at a meeting one time. I think it was.
I got a $50 ticket because I parked in a stupid place. And I was talking to the president, and he said, "I would have fixed your ticket." And I said, "I'm not going to go to the president of BSU and ask him to fix up your ticket."
So just to begin a sort of discussion about those, I'm just wondering if people noticed any broad categories or similarities between things that people mentioned?
I know we did.
Yeah, what was, for example?
Tree-lined streets and better landscaping throughout the town, certainly through town properties. And we also looked at wanting more vibrant downtowns, places with restaurants and shops and parking. I think those were two that we overlapped with, shall we say.
What about parking?
Ample and accessible.
More.
All right.
I think in downtown North Abington, we might have like 0 handicap parking or something. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think I'm right.
Just use the church lot like everybody else.
That's not accessible.
Parking, accessibility.
Did other groups have similar things, other different things that you guys touched upon other than these on the list?
Any grand visions?
Grand vision.
We also have better like fields and playgrounds and
Green space, more open space, green space.
And perhaps better maintenance or use of what we have.
Yeah, better maintenance of the state park, Island Grove.
It would be nice to have more resources to do that. I'm not trying to dark tell.
I read something up that said the zoning at the town lines, there's a lot of junky stuff as you come into the town, you know, and I don't know how you can zone it, maybe, you know, try to limit used car lots and stuff like that. But I mean, just something that gives people a positive impression. You know, the old joke about zoning is you always zone the sewage treatment plant and the waste facilities at the town line, and the other town has the impact on it. But unfortunately, it's true. We don't have a dump or a waste facility at the town line.
That's how you find a landscape, a landfill. You go to the next town and step backwards.
But, yeah. Well, I'm just thinking Mansfield and Easton, they have stuff right on their town lines.
Do you feel that way from particular directions coming in on the town line, or?
Well, 18,
I think all of them.
123 and 18 coming in from Weymouth.
Because we have 2 or 3 major, or not major, but significant highways crossing
Right.
through here, it seems like whichever one you drive in on,
And we're facing a critical time with expansion of Route 18.
Yeah.
We have yet to understand how that's going to impact us, but we know it's going to impact us. And if there is landscaping and tree planting as part of that program, I'm not aware of it. I mean,
There is.
Planning board members are, but
Yeah.
I'm not aware that they're doing anything except widening the road.
No, there is.
Like Henry brought up, when you
Do they have
cross
to
the
plant trees?
town line from Brockton or from Weymouth, you want to know you're in a different place.
Yeah.
You're in a suburban community, not a city, and that's,
Mhm.
So I think that gets to a little bit of, since this is a planning board meeting, a little bit of self-criticism, that when we have plans come before us, that we have specific expectations about what the streetscape plans need to include. And if that means strengthening our language in here, we need to do so, and then sticking by that, making that one of those non-negotiables that we have, where,
Well, we do require, a certain amount of tree planting, and the other problem you have is you have street trees. They need to be the right kind of street trees. I can recall when I asked to have some trees taken down that were on the street property, the town would not take them down. Consequently, we took them down because they would fall down on somebody. And we've had that case happen in the town of Abington.
The trouble-
We do a much better job of taking down diseased trees and things, but
Right.
that is always a problem, and it's expensive.
Well, there is an issue with the towns. It's been in the Globe recently where trees were on the sidewalks and the communities are taking the trees up because the roots screw up the sidewalks. So what they want is the trees planted on the person's yard, but not on, a lot of towns, there's a grass strip between the road and the sidewalk. And those, the roots mess up the sidewalk. So that's an issue. That's something you have to look at as far as, we're all for trees, but you have to look at the placement that doesn't affect the sidewalks, the handicap access and all that stuff.
Well, beyond that, Bruce, there's a tendency to plant them under power lines, which doesn't make a lot of sense.
No,
Yeah.
it doesn't make a lot of sense.
The holes cut in.
Yeah, really. You get interesting shaped trees around power lines.
so when we did our last bylaw review, one of the things they put in there was the new requirement for the used car lots to have green buffers. Does that only, I'm sorry if I'm getting a little off track, does that only apply when they renew a license, or they're gonna dig up something, or otherwise they're grandfathered in?
it would be a new license,
Okay.
Is it just
But again,
license
that's
or
not,
zoning?
that's not enforced by the Board of Selectmen per se, when they issue a license, I think. We'll put it this way. I'm not aware of it. I'm sure the board members aren't aware of that, planning board.
It wasn't a planning board, it was the bylaw review committee that put that in there. Correct? Am I mistaken?
How does a, interesting point, yeah.
And the things you're just talking about tie into one of the things I have, which is better sidewalks, better bike paths, better non-vehicle, ability to move around town.
Yeah, connectivity of neighborhoods by bike paths and sidewalks. We're not as bad as a lot of towns where the subdivisions have sidewalks ending up on a main road where there's no, places like Hanover, Halifax, Hanson, subdivisions, they're required to have stuff, but they get on like 123 or 58 or 27, and there's no sidewalks. It's crazy.
That's something that we've really tried to encourage for many years on the planning board, is to have granite curbings and sidewalks. And we've had the problem with, as Bruce said, with trees, because at one time it was a 2-foot grass strip, which doesn't work because you can't keep it mowed, and even if you do, it dries out. You can't keep it watered. So what we ended up doing was having the sidewalk go right up against the curb, and then the tree planting was behind the sidewalk. So it came right up, and we've had a lot of people say, well, we only want sidewalks on one side of the street. My argument has always been, well, if you have children and you want them to stay on the sidewalk, the only way they get on the sidewalk is to cross the street, and that's what we try to avoid. So we've really, I think, handled that problem. And every home that's put in has to have 2 trees put in front of their home as part of the subdivision control law.
And of course, the thing I get on as a planner is we did the zoning in North Abington Center to encourage businesses on the first level and residential on the second level, which is what everybody likes. And people come to us and say there's no demand for commercial. I think Dave Nisby's barbershop, he has a barbershop on the first floor and residential above it. And there's lots of examples of that in town. But if, you know, if we had the new stuff, we had, when they redid the old theater up in North Abington Center, that was supposed to be commercial on the first floor.
That's correct.
And residential, and it wound up being all resident, you know, resident. To me, it's a mess up there. You've got that, and they've got people parking on the side of the park. We've got to enforce those, or encourage it, or something to get that, because I mean, that's how I'd envision North Abington Center, and the town really has two town centers. So there's North Abington Center and Abington Center. Well, Abington Center got nuked when the bank built. They tore down a whole strip of stores that were there, and now it's a drive-up for the bank and which is awful. A church was there. That's what I'd like to see come back in Abington Center and North Abington Center is the mix of residential and commercial. And I think that there's a demand for it. I really believe that.
And I can understand the bank situation, and I was on the bank board when all of this happened. And I think it needs to be pointed out to the town at the time. It was one of the largest employers in town.
Yep.
We needed to have a driver. The buildings that were there were owned by someone else in town. They were dilapidated. The post office wanted to move out. There was a little restaurant there. There was pollution with the gas station was there that the bank paid some few $100,000 to remediate the
Right.
pollution.
Dry cleaners.
And there was a dry cleaners there, which ended up
All kinds of issues.
You know, and in any case, and the reason that the bank, it was the main office of the Abington Savings Bank. The reason the bank had to move out of Abington was the fact that the Verizon couldn't supply us telephone lines to the building. And it was caused by a problem that was up near St. Bridget's Church, something to do with the, whatever it is with telephone companies. So that's why the offices moved out of Abington and moved to Weymouth. As I say, and not only that, but it was an employer that was paying a lot of people some real good money at the time. And it was a shame. And then since then, like many banks, they were bought out by somebody else. When you become a stock bank, you have the problem that if you don't take an offer that's substantial, stockholders sue you. There's no easy way out of it. So in any case, it was sold to a small bank out of New Bedford, and then that was sold to a larger bank, and then it's sold to another larger bank. So it is unfortunate that that area, when I came into town, it wasn't the best area in the world. Certainly one of the things that happened, we had a big fire, we had a bank on the corner, which is now the Abington Liquor Store. That whole building went down, and Abington Liquor actually moved from that strip that the bank is in now over to where they are presently.
The fire was 1958.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, it was
Well,
60, almost 60 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, so in thinking of all of these things and
I'll
being in
read-
the mindset of this exercise, I want to show you the overall town goals from the 2009 master plan. So 10 years ago, kind of look at those because we have drafted an updated vision statement for the town that we would like your feedback on. So the 2009 master plan goals really look at managing and guiding development, to have a positive impact on the tax base. It looks at preserving and protecting the town's character and amenities, accommodating housing needs, employment opportunities, providing for commercial and business growth, and meeting other community development needs. So that echoes a lot of things that people have expressed are priorities, but we've added a few elements to it based on feedback from the community. So this is the printout, the huge printout of our draft version of a new vision statement. Eric, do you want to read it?
Sure. So yeah, taking into account the stuff that we heard from you at the last meeting, and then we hoped to kind of compare this with sort of the vision that you guys wrote on your Post-it notes. So we wrote, it includes some of these details, but adds a few things that we thought that we'd heard that we thought maybe that this left out. So this new vision says, Abington has a pleasant small town feel bolstered by a supportive and connected community that appreciates and celebrates its rich history. Adding to the town's character and environmental integrity are several healthy, connected, and accessible natural resource and recreation areas. Abington is a welcoming and attractive place for new business and economic development. Central to this are its two vibrant, pedestrian-friendly downtowns with a diverse range of businesses and a variety of housing and employment opportunities. The town has exemplary school facilities to which students can walk or bike safely, and town services enhance the quality of life for residents. So we tried to sort of take things we heard and sum it up in a vision that expresses it in terms of what you might see in Abington in the future in 20 years, 30 years. So we wanted to open this up to now some ideas about what you think, if this is missing anything, or any of this wording could be worded differently, or if this, where you think this aligns with the vision that you guys thought of in that initial exercise, and where maybe
I have
it could
a
be.
question, and again, maybe I'm being picayune, but it says, adding to the town's character. Has there been a conversation as to what the town's character is and what people want it to be, or is that, I mean, again, the rest of it adding to the town's character, but does the town know what it is now, what it wants to be?
Or is that the sentence in Beaver before it?
Or, yeah, the kind of pleasant small town feel with a connected community.
Yeah, our impression of the town character, and I mean, it could mean a lot of things to a lot of people, of course, but from what we know so far, our impression of the town character is that Abington, even though it's considered a suburb of Boston, has kind of this smaller town feel, and it has a lot of wooded areas and parks, and so that kind of smaller town feel is what we've gotten the impression is the town character. But
I think it's something the town celebrates, you know, I mean,
yeah,
we're not a small town anymore, 15, 16,000 people, but
true.
but I think people think that this place is a small town. I really believe that. Because there's a lot of communities in this town with the school, the historical society, a lot of people are involved, the churches. So there's a lot of there's a lot of communities within this community, a lot of social communities. And this is something that people want. You can't go back. This isn't going to be the Abington that when Wayne moved into this town a long time ago when it was 4,000 or 5,000 people. Abington will never be like that.
Right.
But if we can preserve elements of it that make people feel welcome and have a vibrant economy and still keep that small town feel, even though we're not really a small town.
It's a worthy
Maybe
question.
town character is a bit of a vague term. Maybe we can find a better way to say that.
And another option is maybe creating like an online survey and getting people to list what are the top 3 things in Abington that give it its character, that give it its feel. And we get a bunch of input from an online survey.
Emily, you and Eric at the school a week or so ago when I was out there, when you're making the presentation, you remarked on our cover, on a vegetated cover. And I think that's something interesting to tell the people here, the percentages that we have compared to the rest of them.
Oh, yeah. Well, the kind of agreed upon, and this is not necessarily the set standard. There's a little bit of debate about what the amount of canopy cover a town needs to be considered like comfortable and livable. It's considered, it's 40% usually, but Abington has 56% canopy cover,
Wow.
so, which is more than half. It's pretty.
Yeah,
Well, it puts to lie to everyone who says the town's fully developed. That's all we hear all the time. You
Think
can't
of
go in
Island
this town
Grove
anymore.
and
It's
then
fully
Ames Knoll
developed.
and then the golf course.
Yeah,
And
there's a lot of
Griffith's
green
Dairy,
space.
and, it's,
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's
a lot
not
of small
surprising,
areas,
actually, when
too,
you think,
for sure.
you look at it.
But even some of the neighborhoods that have built out, they weren't clear cut. They still have some of these tall trees out there. What?
One of the phrases we heard was woodland feel of the town. Something.
Is there an example of a town or a community that has 40%? Not to quiz you, but just out of curiosity.
You know what? I remember, let me think for a second. Whitman,
Really?
yeah.
That's interesting.
Whitman has around 40. Brockton has a little less. Brockton has like 30 or 35.
That's not surprised, dense development.
Yeah, it's a little
But
more
Whitman
built up.
is an little factory town, and it's a small town. And so much of the development was around the center of the town, because that's where the shoe factories were. And that was cluster housing, because people could walk to the Bostonian, they could walk to the Shank shop, they could walk to all these things. So you think about it, Whitman, Abington was the little factory town in a way, but
Yeah.
it's a bigger town land area than Whitman.
Yeah, yeah. Of course, got the state park. And
So when we look at this vision, this is what we want people to say about the town essentially 10 years from now is all of these things?
Basically, yeah.
yeah,
Or-
a reality of the future, 10, 20 years,
Okay.
you know, in
'Cause
the
I-
long term.
So I say we're working towards some of them now, but we're not quite there in some of them. But if you'd say, this is what we want people to say
Right,
in
that's why, yeah.
2029.
It's written in the present tense, as if
Okay.
someone is saying this 20 years in the future,
Okay.
as if these things have happened.
Okay.
Like the visioning exercise. Like imagine.
So even though you revise the plans every 10 years, you're really looking out a
10
longer
10 to
horizon.
20,
yeah.
Longer horizon.
Okay.
Great.
The reason there's no trees in Whitman is because they cut all the oaks down so they can use it in the Constitution when they.
Yeah.
Don't start that rumor. I'll shoot you down on that one.
I don't know if I've got that.
Which town, does it come out of, where'd the actual oak come from?
We can
Oh,
try
the
to do a
planks
slide
came
show.
from
Have
South
everyone
Abington,
do it.
yeah.
It came from South Abington? Did it from, oh, okay.
From
South
South
Whit-
Abington.
Whitman.
So we wanted to just we wanted to shift gears a little bit and to focus on some more specific things that we were going to focus on in our plan based on the specific sections that we were doing.
Yep, and we have a slideshow presentation. As you all know, it's not functioning.
Can we
But-
cluster around the laptop?
Right, we have some
So,
like good
yeah.
examples. So we were thinking, yeah, if everyone sort of maybe moves to the end of the first couple rows, then
Yeah, can you, if I even just hold
you
the
just
computer
hold
here, I
it
think you'll be
and
able
go
to.
through it, and it should be. I think that should work. We'll wing it.
Say, just go down to the gym and get one of those kids.
Okay, coming down from the hinterlands.
Oh, come on, Doug, you can do it.
That green cover is really interesting.
Yeah, I mean,
That's a selling point.
that's fascinating. Yeah, because we're always told they had attics out there. No, it's not.
All right.
Let's see.
Did you draw this?
Can I sneak in here?
I did.
Nice.
Can everyone, more or less, can you guys see?
What if I
All right, cool. And we'll, anyone who wants like a PDF of the presentation afterward, we'll send it to you too, if there's anything you can't read. So one of the things that we've been hearing a lot from community feedback and from the planning board is that there is this desire to increase town connectivity. But connectivity on its own is kind of a vague phrase. And so we've been asking, the question we've been asking a lot is what exactly does this mean? What does this mean to people who live in Abington, and what are the possibilities? So I'm gonna give a couple of examples of what this could mean for Abington. And then we're gonna do a little exercise with maps and trace paper to get some input from you guys of areas where you see potential for increased connectivity. So, first thing I'm gonna talk about is walking and biking. A lot of towns in Massachusetts are looking at this. A lot of towns have been designed to accommodate cars, and walking and biking have fallen by the wayside a little bit. So there are a lot of areas that are kind of looking into how to make better connections. And based on feedback from the last community meeting, I've mapped out some areas of potential issues for walking and biking, some challenges to connectivity, namely the intersections that people said they felt were dangerous or just really busy. And also the commuter rail that does go through town, and it kind of separates some of the areas like to the east, like Griffin's Dairy and the rail trail, from the rest of the town. And then beyond that, also based on the community meeting, we've mapped out some areas that are considered destinations, such as Ames Knoll, North Abington, the rail trail, Island Grove, just to name a few, and sort of just drawn arrows between them for areas that have the potential to be connected with either walking or biking or both. So looking at everything from expanding trail networks and creating more connectivity into the Beaverbrook Conservation Area to how to safely connect both of the downtowns on that busy street. And so thinking about both of these things, and particularly thinking about the places where the challenges overlap with the places where we see opportunities, that's something that we'd like you guys to think about when you do the map exercise today. Kind of think about potential solutions, and also think about like destinations that are important to you. And there are a lot of towns, like I said, that are looking into this. Bedford, Massachusetts has a pedestrian and bicycle plan. They did a whole plan just for this. And one of the really effective things that they did was they identified all these pictures on your left are photographs of areas in town that aren't serving any need for pedestrians and people on bicycles. So I'd kind of identifying specific problem areas and then finding examples of solutions that would work for those areas. So kind of a more pointed and site-specific approach to certain areas that they found was really effective for them. Everything from adding a lane to adding roundabouts to thinking about intersections and how to make them more pedestrian friendly. And then there are two spots where we've seen potential to create new paths. The street called Charles Street, which ends at a dead end right before Griffin's Dairy Farm. There's a potential to create a path through there that would actually connect the rail trail to Griffin's Dairy. And then there is a sewer easement behind the library that, was it you that called it the West Abington Walking Connector?
I did indeed.
The West Abington Walking Connector has the potential to be a shared use path that would really connect east and west in the town, connect this area to all of the neighborhoods on the other side. And then finally, something that we've been thinking about that we'd like you to think about in the exercise as well is improving existing paths. This is the entrance to Mount Vernon Cemetery. There isn't a sidewalk. There could be. That might make it easier for people walking. Thinking about, this is a picture from Cambridge, but thinking about how to really separate pedestrians and people on bicycles from traffic in terms of safety. And then also thinking about intersections that are more pedestrian focused, thinking of intersections that have more street trees, more space for pedestrians, better crosswalks, things like that. And then just looking at signage, how do you connect places? Abington does have a few, this is a sign from the rail trail in Abington, has a few places that have great signage that tell you about where you are, but it doesn't tell you about what the places, like what places are around you that you might be able to get to. So like Boston has the Freedom Trail, you all know it's that line that's painted, but it serves to direct people from destination to destination. And towns also have these kind of walking tour maps. My hometown, Portland, Maine, has some posted in parks. So like it says, you are here, and then you can be aware of the destinations that are around you and how to get there. It's especially helpful for people coming into town from through the rail trail or on the commuter rail. And then the next type of connectivity, and then lastly, bring it back to the Bedford plan. The town might look into, if this is something that people really want, doing a plan specifically for this, and doing a vision statement, and also having goals. Bedford's goals ranged from everything from improving sidewalks and infrastructure to promoting a culture of biking and walking in their town. And then the last kind of connectivity I want to touch on really quickly, serving a diverse population. Think about who is this for, and who might not be benefiting. Populations like the elderly, low-income people, young people, persons with disabilities. How do you think about creating better connectivity for them as well? And then lastly, a type of connectivity that people might not always think about first when they think about connectivity, but it's super important, is ecological connectivity. How does this deer get to this patch of woods? What are the obstacles?
From my backyard.
Goes up the railroad line.
Yeah, walks through people's yards, across the road.
I can't figure it out, I don't think it can.
So one major issue that's happening really all over the US, it's especially a problem in New England because New England is so old and so it's pretty built up, is habitat fragmentation. Usually happens when people put in roads, especially highways, and also development can kind of just split up chunks of forest, making it hard for wildlife to move around and also making it more dangerous for drivers. So Abington has some really large forested areas right now, but there are some spots where they're sort of cut off from each other. So thinking about in terms of connectivity, are there ways to reconnect those spaces, or are there problem areas where you see wildlife crossing the street a lot?
I was gonna say that,
Dark green, going back to that for a second, the dark green in the forested areas.
yeah.
Yeah, these are just like an outline of not 100% of them, but like kind of the larger chunks of forest.
The wildlife are getting more bold too, we've noticed. They just cross right over the street, they don't care.
Well, there are some towns around Massachusetts who have that problem too, and they have come up with some interesting solutions. In Concord, Massachusetts, under Route 2, they built an underpass for wildlife. And they've actually documented over 30 different species using it, and one guy in a kayak once. So that's been really effective for them. In Wyoming, they built an overpass for wildlife. This is a kind of a larger highway area, but it reduced animal vehicle crashes in that area by 80%. So it's really effective. Some towns, like this town in British Columbia, have really incorporated thinking about corridors and reestablishing them into their planning process. And this is a culvert designed for turtles in Carver, Massachusetts, so identifying a specific problem and trying to find a solution for that. And then finally, I just want to touch on, Abington has some really large areas of intact forests and wetlands that are really kind of unique to this area being so close to Boston. So this map is a Biomap 2 map, which shows landscapes that are really intact and diverse and have lots of different species and are really healthy. So kind of thinking about maintaining connectivity in these, especially focusing on these large areas that Abington has. Because obviously the best strategy for preserving ecological connectivity is to not build on some of these really valuable areas, kind of keep what's there.
Not screw it up.
Yeah, and so that's all I have to present on connectivity, just kind of some ideas about what other towns are doing, and kind of thinking about what it might mean to you, what are the opportunities, what's exciting to you, what seems far-fetched. And yeah, we're gonna pass out these maps with trace paper, and I'm gonna grab some markers, and we're just gonna do an exercise, maybe take like 10 minutes and talk with the person next to you about it, and just draw arrows, circle things, label things, write things, whatever you feel like doing.
There's no crazy idea.
Sir. Would it be possible to find out from John Stone if there's a particular area that tends to have a lot of animal vehicle collisions or something?
Colors, what do you mean?
Just like
Markers?
guys are always being sent out because of a deer or a turkey or something.
Colors do I need?
However many you want.
There's my place right
Up
there.
to you.
I don't know how people would ever say yes to it, but it must be.
Back up.
I want to make Washington Street one way, take the other half of the road and make the
It's
right
nice for
turn.
everyone to have one.
Yeah, no, you actually I've heard, oh, can I sign it? I've actually heard about people wanting to do streets as one way.
Because you could have this entire span going all the way through the town just for walking and biking. And traffic could still go in the other two state highways. I don't think you'd lose any access. It would take some adjusting.
I
But,
think, oh, sorry.
but then you can connect from bicycles, basically all the way down from here, from Abington Center. You can connect the two schools, the cemetery, and all the way up to North Abington, all connected by a safe walking bike path. Island Grove, you connect Island Grove, cemetery, two schools, playing fields.
I think people would, when you make streets one way though, I think what they would do is cite the example of Rockton Center.
Yeah.
That was made one way one long time ago to, supposedly it was going to spur development and screwed it up.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, you know, I can see that.
It's wide enough in a lot of spots where you don't need to take much land. But I'll tell you what, in some spots you'd have to.
But I like the idea of marking the roads as dedicated bike lanes for starters. You know, the streets are wide enough. I mean, imagine if there was a dedicated bike lane on Washington Street, you know, schools and stuff like that. Or even on the road coming this way. If you go into Brookline, Boston, you see those things. In Brockton, you see that. So I mean, that to me would be a place to start.
Hypothetically. All right.
I think
so
it
here's
would be great if you could, before you act, or at any point in time, just on the trace paper, mark like the corners of the square. So that when we go back to actually figure out what you wrote, we can line it up.
That's a
with the map.
great call, Liz. Marcus, if you guys want one.
Thank you.
All right, so I imagine this is the big one here. How possible would it be to put a bike path through Mount Vernon? They freak out.
Well, Wayne was on, are you still on the board about that?
Yes.
What would you feel about having a bike trail through Mount Vernon?
The biggest problem we have is liability.
Yeah.
If we give permission, we're in trouble. If we don't give permission, we're not. Believe it or not, it's so terrible.
Yeah, I mean, it's,
There's a lot of people that walk through there. We got rid of the dogs because people wouldn't keep them on a leash and they wouldn't clean up what that happened.
Well, you know-
And the people that were there, that seeing their families, were really bull at us. I mean, talk about getting mad at you when someone's shitting on someone's grave. Excuse my French. They get really bent out of shape. But so we still have people come in there with dogs. We still tell them not to. Then they give you a hard time.
Kathy and I have snowshoed through Mount Vernon.
Yeah, I mean, we have no problem as long as people, I mean, there's a ton of people walking there.
I like the idea of snowshoeing. I was gonna go today for it gotten better. But Mount Vernon is a cool place to do that, so ride a bike or snowshoe is fun. Let a kid walking.
There's already a trail on the bridge.
But really, that connector between the bike, the rail trail and the Griffin's Dairy and Doug's, the connector between the high school and the Hancock Street. Those are got it.
Beaver Conservation.
Yeah, the biggest people are going to be the who live on that road,
Well, the people bitched about it.
because all of a sudden they're going to have 300 kids potentially walking up and down that road every day.
But it's not going to be like it's a car path. We're not really all about that. And that's how Jeff wrangled it on the planning board, is that connection between Shore Ave and Hancock Street.
Then would you send them down Hancock and out Linwood, or would you just go down Van Buren?
I think that the main thing would be to get them out to Hancock Street, because there's all those subdivisions off of Hancock Street. I mean, they'd have to go, it doesn't come out on Hancock Street, it comes out on one of those streets that goes up in there. But I think that's the connectivity, because that would really, the town would save so much money in schools.
It would.
If the kids could walk from Hancock Street area to the, something that was on my mind when they did the Bay State property, 121 Randolph Street, was the connection between Wyman Road and Hancock Street. And I think they said they might be open to that. But again, there's another natural connector. Goes through some really pretty woods and stuff like that. It's 139. Where is that?
If you're on this side and you come on the bridge, it's going on this side to northwest.
139's here.
Okay, where's?
So it'll be right there-ish.
I'm just going to pop up the map. Yeah, it's Temple Street. So it would be right here, connecting to, well, here's Summit Road. The connector, like right here to Wyman Road. See that right there?
You can do it.
Yes, yeah, so here's the school and then
I
there's.
mean, they're going to have those residential units in that thing. Again, it's connectivity to the neighborhood. It's not a car route. It would be a walking route.
I wish you could put like a biking path between North Abington and the train station.
Well, put down there's a lot of places where they have bike paths along the railroad right away, but I'm not sure about the T being, what is that? What the hell? That's something we can think about anyway. There's a bike trail paralleling the railroad right away.
There's a train station. Across from Woodlands.
Where's the railroad?
The black line. Oh, the green line next to the black line.
But they could go on.
So it's gotta be right here.
It's got to be this black line. Yeah. That's easy.
And then she just
I may be totally crazy, but it's worth, that's what this is. This is a visioning exercise. Wow, there's a great one out in East Deerfield near the Pan Am right away. That's where the old Boston and Maine. And my wife and I have ridden on it. And that's a great trail. Of course, it also starts at the big train yard, which is an attraction for me. What else?
Let's go just use that.
What else? So that I think is a big one. The Hanover Rail Branch, the connector. What about? Well, there's a clear salt installed bike trail along North Quincy Street.
123.
Well, it's North Quincy Street. You know where we're gonna? You get up Hancock Street, you get out Chestnut Street into
All the way
Brockton.
down to here.
Yeah. So I mean, there is a clear salt installed, bike along. So I mean, maybe some sort of connector between Claire Saltonstall Bikeway there and into Abington here.
I heard it.
A lot of communities have these connections. Claire Saltonstall Bike Trail is a pretty recognized bike trail. And it would be nice to tie in bike trails in Abington to that, to North Abington Center, and stuff like that.
Gotta get that safety audit done at 123. Figure out what grant opportunities we can do. What's interesting is the
take about
connectivity
one more
between Ames Knoll, Holbrook, Weymouth coming up this way. I'm wondering what type of path could be up that.
Well, yeah.
It's very wet, but
Yeah, but I mean, it would be a nice path. Because I think that I'm preaching to the choir, but I think that's an underutilized asset if we could improve access to it without disrupting the park.
I need to go take a walk through here to the point, Blueberry Hill. How do you even access it though?
I'd rather do it in the winter than in the summertime.
Where do you access it off? Vineyard or off Thicket?
Well, here's Wyman Road, here's Harvard Street. I would go off of Vineyard. Yeah, here's Vineyard right here. That's right here. That's Doug Ulrich's old stomping ground. It's because it was right here.
Where's Griffin's Dairy? Yeah, this little spur right here is, you figure out a better connector between here and here, because that doesn't include Mount Vernon.
Yeah, put the line in.
Because, actually, where's the entrance to Mount? Oh, it's up 58.
I think this is a key, connecting the Claire Saltonstall Bikeway to the rest of the town.
You guys want to just kind of finish up your last
The idea of the rail trail along the MBTA right away, which
And
is
we're
probably
gonna collect those.
to connect it to Griffin's Dairy, obviously Hancock
Finish up whatever
Street,
you're
going
talking
up into this area that you were talking about. My little thing about going from 139 up to that area up there, I think I'd be afraid of it.
Yeah. The Carissa property is next to the Blueberry Hill area, right?
I think they
Is
got
it
some,
connected?
they gave them some things to show.
Or is it just nearby?
It probably could be, we just picked up a
It looks like it is.
And then the other thing you mentioned was constant, is that's another thing.
Yeah.
My final grad school project, my master's in public administration, was a reuse plan of Griffin's Dairy. It got an A. The idea was that I was commissioned by the town of Abington to do something. And of course, I think my highest and best use was for it to be a school, which went away. But we had to go through this whole exercise of all the uses, highest, best score, the whole thing. Everything else. It wasn't a planning degree, that was so cool. I've shown that to Peter Schaefer and stuff. It's fun to do.
Yeah, we went to Griffin's Dairy. Well, we did a day in Abington, couple weeks ago. I came for the day to walk around and see about like, all right, let's look at this walkability. And so we walked from place to place and we went to all the parks and stuff. And Griffin's Dairy is really nice. It's cool.
And I think there are spaces to connect it up. There's a multiple phase plan that they have for the use, the total use of the property, and I think at some point it is to connect to our term.
That's awesome. Yeah, that was one thing we also were like, this would be really cool.
Yeah. I mean, you can go here, but you're right at the side, but don't make it, I mean, it's literally.
Yep.
You know, you're
Expanding their tracks within the other side.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, we noticed a lot of the really cool stuff around here, so it's pretty close together.
Yeah.
Mount Vernon Cemetery, we walked from Griffin's Dairy to Mount Vernon Cemetery, Griffin Cemetery, up toward Abington Center. It's all there.
And if you just bang the left, you can get on the road.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
I think signage was like, just do a lot for,
Yeah.
so I know where to go, because
Yeah.
stuff is pretty close.
It is.
Well, I think that's why there's so much green in this town.
So we really appreciate your input. You guys just hold on to those for a moment. We'll collect them at the end, and it'll go into, how we think about connectivity and paths. We're going to kind of move on to another aspect, since we're doing the kind of land use section and considering development in town. One of the things we heard, a major theme from the last meeting, was sort of concern of the challenges about residential development and sort of like low density, kind of sprawling development. I have a little presentation about this
Short
particular
one.
topic. One of the main, there are several issues with that. One issue that really might affect this town is the fact that it's found that typical suburban homes in this sort of low density spread out development actually cost the town usually more in services than they generate in taxes because of the infrastructure costs and maintenance of that infrastructure and building new to support that kind of development. Also, lost functionality here. Another problem with low density zoning is that while it's intended to maintain a sort of small town or rural feel, oftentimes it has an opposite effect. If you can it's kind of tough to see here, but having these really large lot sizes and sprawling development can eat away at some of the natural areas that you might actually rather preserve. So some of the solutions that we're thinking about kind of fall under this idea of smart growth, which I'm sure that the planning board has thought or heard a lot about. But if you haven't thought about this, the idea of smart growth is that you can avoid this, you can kind of steer away from the sprawling style of development by creating more compact, walkable village centers, which actually aligns with the goal that you guys have expressed of wanting more vibrant, mixed-use villages. So it's actually found that instead of something like this, that homes in this sort of more efficient village style actually generate more tax revenue than they require in services, along with the more commercial and economic activity that is a benefit for the tax base. So basic smart growth principles that we're thinking about in Abington are thinking about around the current village centers, ways to appropriately increase density, provide a range of housing options for a range of income and ages, providing a variety of transportation options, mixing uses between residential, commercial, offices, and other, and then greening up the streets, making them a comfortable place to be, providing open space, and promoting low-impact development. So with those kind of ideas in mind, we wanted to look at these three boards. So if you guys could all come down here in a moment and take one of these sticker pads, and for each one of these three boards, this one showing different examples of landscaping potentially for the village. These ones showing different styles and levels, heights and densities in the downtown on the main strips. And this one's showing different sort of residential neighborhood options that may or may not be appropriate around the downtowns that might have more multifamily or denser development. So for each one of these boards, if you take one of these pads and take a green indicating your first choice and put the sticker on your thing that you like the best, that answers this question the best. Then take a yellow for your second choice, and then a red for your least favorite image from the entire picture. So if you want to just come down, form a line, or just form a line.
Single file.
Okay.
So it's for each board. So each person should have 3 stickers on each board.
Picture of the monitor and style of the window.
Just put it right on. Put it, if you can, put it in the white line.
Red, yellow, green, yellow.
Green is your favorite. It would be, I have them up here. Yeah.
To catch the
Red's the one that you're not crazy about, and then yellow's the one that you like the second best.
the look and feel.
Devin and Josh were there. They said,
You could, this is Mary's, we zone that out existing.
What they were doing.
But I mean, they zone us out.
One of them was, they're both out of college. One's teaching at the school, which is, autistic. And then the other one wants to be a doctor, so he's out of college, so they're trying to get into medical school, so it's going to get into that.
I always run into the right there, she's talking about her what you do with. Oh, that's what she is. She's still doing car stickers now.
No, I'm getting in line.
Gotta be your car stickers, come on.
Yeah.
You think, Bruce? Is there a category for none of the above? All?
Yeah, you always have to do that.
Me? Yes.
You always have to do it contrary, you know, I love you for that.
Thank you, Bruce.
It's a friend.
Good to be loved or something. Oh, we don't get to use blue, is that right? We only get to use red, yellow, and green. We're doing stoplights. Really looks cool for Abington? I would always have read some things.
That's when it is,
Only a planner would like that one, I'm sorry. Only.
Somebody's got to do it.
Let's do that.
Oh, the park in that room, that's like.
Feature hours and hours, but you could have big things, was around, the whole theater, and all this other stuff.
Oh, you really do like that one,
Green is good. No, it's yellow.
Every time we don't want to, you can't play on the sidewalks. No, I put it in blue just to be
Designing a pocket park like that.
One below it it's main, right? It's no, it's
Residential.
literally steeple. It's Portsmouth.
Portsmouth, yeah, Portsmouth.
This is definitely none of the above. Near downtown center, okay. Near downtown.
I didn't follow the right
So it's from near downtown. And that doesn't work anywhere on the planet.
Salem or
Yeah, no.
Vermont City.
No, Salem wouldn't even like that.
It's better.
Salem really wouldn't like that. Well, yeah, but I mean, now we're doing degrees of badness.
But you know, they won't be. That's the problem. This is the ideal road here.
Just put in the center.
Back to Berkman. That looks like stone. This looks like we had to. So, okay, so anti-snob zoning, so we can squeeze more stuff on smaller lots.
I'm going to go to a thing from Brockton later on this week. They've got an old freight yard in the center of the city. It's 14, 15 acres. CSX still owns it.
Brockton?
Yep, it's in the center of Brockton. It's a freight yard. It was an old New Haven. It was actually lasted into the Penn Central. It lasted in the Conrail. It was 14, 15 acres. It's right in the center of the city. And of course, you know, Colleen, we've been involved in that for a long time, but city planner Rob May is going to have an exercise. So I said, yeah, I'll go to that. I'd like to see it. I'd like to see part of it still used for rail.
What section of the downtown?
Okay. You know where the police station is?
Yeah.
Okay. Here's the police station. Here's the bat terminal.
Yeah.
Right across the street, heading north, if you call 128 north, there's like a place that does like highway traffic signs, and there's a high rise, and there's like a scrapyard. That part of Brockton, right? Well, right behind there, right not far up there, is the old railroad yard.
Okay.
They actually had homeless people living in there, and that's where they kicked them all out of a few years ago.
I didn't realize, I never knew that was a rail yard.
That was an active rail yard, I'd say up into the very early 70s.
That would explain why I do not know it as a rail yard.
Because it was, when the shoe industry was going, it was like LCLs, less than carload freight, and they would bring trucks with load box cars up with stuff there. They also had, when they used to have when the circus came to Brockton Fair, straight shows, straight shows is one of the last, it's probably the last rail carried circus show, and straights would have their circus cars at that particular place.
Okay. Interesting.
I have a lot of train books that show pictures of the place.
Hey, when you used to come to the guy who owned my house, where was the store located? You walk in on the left?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Tim Bell. But he's gone now. He was saying that's too bad. Jesus, I didn't think he was that old a guy to me. Because I was a kid when I was.
So we really appreciate all of your input. We will,
So thankful.
in the interest of time, we're just going to move on to one last short presentation. If you do have more thoughts on this, we'll leave our email addresses so you can give us some more feedback about some specifics about some of the things you saw here.
And we can hang out after if you want to talk about anything, questions, comments,
Well,
concerns.
beauty's in the eye of the beholder.
It is. It is.
Trying to get done by 8. So the last thing we are. Last thing we just want to talk briefly about, since we're doing a watershed protection element, just kind of, which is an element that talks about protecting water resources and water quality in Abington. So currently, I don't know if can you guys kind of see a little update out here? So this is a map of Abington showing the two main water resources you have, Cleveland Pond and Island Grove Pond, and the streams that flow in and out of them. And then probably many of you raise your hand if you know what a watershed is. Right, probably a lot of people. If you don't, a watershed, these colored areas show the area of a watershed, which is the area of land upon which, when water falls, it flows into a particular water body. So this green area, for example, all the rain that falls on that green area flows into the upper Shumatuscatkin River. Am I saying that right, by the way?
Yeah, Shumatuscatkin.
Better than most people.
You did very well.
We realized a few days ago that we've been guessing this whole time, and Wayne didn't correct us during the presentation last week, so we didn't know if you didn't have the heart to correct us.
Or the mighty Shumi.
Beaver Brook on the other side.
Shumatuscatkin, come on, get it right.
Oh, is it? Oh, there's a real way.
That's a historian.
Yes.
That's right. So showing this drainage pattern of water falling and going into those rivers. These particular ones around the Shumatuscatkin matter because you have in this town, just south of the Island Grove Pond, a groundwater recharge area, and a wellhead where you get a portion of your drinking water.
Myers
It's really
Ave.
the-
Myers
yeah,
Ave.
in Myers
It's not
Ave.
very
So-
good water.
Wells.
So the water quality definitely is important there.
There was a plan to have a transfer station near there a long time ago.
Myers Ave.
Yeah.
It's a large wetland
It was going to
area
be
now.
Morrison and Knutson. There's a giant construction company. We're going to do it. Just seemed to tell me, the guy brought a rat to the meeting. It was wild.
Potentially something you want to
It's
avoid
effective.
around here.
He brought
think
a
of that?
rat.
Something else that potentially affects water quality is the impervious surface. This map of the black is all the impervious surface, so where rainwater hits streets or structures and can't directly infiltrate into the ground. A major problem with that is the pollution that generally forms and gets spilled on the roads and streetways and structures that currently gets taken up by that rainwater, goes directly into a sewer system and deposited in the streams or water bodies. And it is found that, generally speaking, studies have shown when impervious surface within a watershed reaches even just 10%, pollution of those water bodies start to become a problem. Luckily, Abington has a really nice array of wetlands that do take in and infiltrate some of this water. But in just this upper Shumatuskakant watershed, which contains Route 18, there is actually 21% impervious surface, indicating that there's a really potential for pollution to be taken up from that developed area.
What area, I'm sorry?
What's that?
What area was that you're referring to?
The what I'm calling the upper Shumatuskakant watershed, or the
Yeah.
island,
Kind of one
basically
of the
all the
sub-watersheds in
all the
general.
water that ends up in Island Grove Pond is the rainwater that falls on this green area, which is a very highly developed area, 21% impervious surface. So what many towns are looking towards and in kind of thinking about mitigating this issue is called green infrastructure, which are efforts to direct that water into usually vegetated areas that hold the water and then infiltrate it into the ground. Those can be kind of as small as just a tree pit on the side of the street where water enters and then infiltrates, or might line an entire street like that, or like figuring out places for larger rain gardens. Some areas, some probably generally smaller areas, could have porous pavement where they're actually pavement designed to allow the water to infiltrate through, or on some of the larger buildings, green roofs that hold the water and then it then evaporates, so it never goes off into the storm drain or and into the water bodies. A couple examples of close by towns or cities that have used this. In Boston, the Mystic River Watershed Association has a plan to do just that. This is showing one of their proposed solutions. And also Melrose, Mass. Melrose, Mass actually created a green infrastructure plan and then received basically funding from the state under the Act 604B to make these improvements. So basically the last couple minutes, we just wanted to hear if anyone had any thoughts or ideas about where any one of these potential four things, a bioswale, a rain garden, porous pavement, or green roofs, where they might be able to go if you see them in Abington as having possibilities, or what challenges that you see to incorporating some of these green infrastructure.
Well, the
ideas.
green roofs, a lot of communities require new development to have them. And I think, in fact, I think the proposal in Hanover, when they want to do the housing by the Hanover Mall, I went to one of those presentations, and the green roofs. And they're doing that on a lot of public facilities and stuff like that, using the rainwater for the irrigation and stuff like that. So that's something I think that we could do fairly easily as far as on new construction, and even get some people to do it residentially, because save on their water bills and stuff. So that's one thing.
They didn't do a green roof, but they did a lot of that with the LEED certification of this building.
Yeah.
Recycling, the water systems and recycling.
I think another thing we have to pay attention to are some of the natural near disasters that have happened ecologically in town. Back in the 60s, we had Dutch elm disease come through and wipe out a lot of the tree-lined streets in town. More recently, I live on the banks of the Shumatuskakant River. I mean, I cross it every day walking my dog. It's in my backyard. But we suffered the loss of all of the hemlock trees just a couple of years ago. I can't tell you what a devastating effect it had along the banks of the Shumatuskakant, and I'm on the upper section of the Shumatuskakant River. A lot of that recharge area, a lot of that absorption area, the trees that did that are dead. And you know, I don't have it in my budget to, you know, go planting trees all through that area again. I welcome it, and I'm not even sure what I'd plant. If the hemlocks didn't survive, what will? And when we lost all of our amazing elm trees, I mean, we have pictures in the historic archives of beautiful tree-lined streets, and they're all elms, and they're all gone. How do you deal with that? I mean, is there some sort of planting bank? Is there some sort of oversight that will look at what happens when these things devastate what we have in town? And things that we took for granted, and things that are out of our control. I mean, there was no way of controlling the woolly allegiant or whatever it was that took out all of those amazing hemlock trees. And I just, you know, look at the changing view from my backyard around the Shumatuskakant and think this has had to have had a devastating effect on that river and on the wetlands in general. So besides looking at the public locations for these things, I think as a town to be more proactive when we're faced with that sort of loss. I mean, we barely talked about this town, and yet the effects were devastating.
So incorporating education.
You can't restore these things. I mean, I had an older neighbor, long past now, but who told me the hurricane of '38, Mountain Grove got devastated.
It did.
They brought in a steam-powered sawmill, set it up there, and lumbered all the, and replanted it. And those pines that are, you can't get your arm around now, were replanted after the hurricane of '38.
They actually called in, you know, a very famous landscape architect firm to talk about how to deal with Mountain Grove. And they gave advice that is exactly the opposite of what you would give today. They said, oh, it's a pine grove, plant more pines. But that left it vulnerable to something coming through and destroying the pines, where now we go for eco-diversity in a park like that and plant all different kinds of trees. They were advised to, it was Olmsted's office, by the way, to plant nothing but pines. And they even started a small nursery there to grow them, and complained a few years later that the young toughs in town were breaking off the tops of the trees and killing them. So that wasn't even a perfect solution. But again, that was a public park, and that was a different type of disaster. It didn't wipe out the pine trees because they were pine trees, it just wiped out the park.
So one thing in reference to thinking about the woody adelgid or other like invasive species that are destroying some of our native trees that are still predominant and kind of in decline. I know that we've been learning about a lot of landscape architecture is looking at and also considering climate change, how the climate is kind of warming, and some species are starting to move north, thinking about like what's going to be here in the future and starting to plant species that are going to be able to survive for the long term. Yeah, kind of anticipating that change and sort of looking at what's coming and kind of planting for that. So that's like one strategy that people are looking into.
It's a real issue. I mean, I think most of in one of our classes it was showed a list of like all the major native trees, and each one has a potentially, you know,
they have a weakness.
They have a there's an insect or there's something that is they're starting to see some activity. So you know.
Now, is it true that they've developed like chestnuts and elms and things that are now available?
Resistant? Yeah, so that's the
They really haven't got they've tried to hybridize
it's
material
not
that
fully
will make it. I mean, we have the ash borer coming in, which is in New York State and Pennsylvania. There are so many things, and it keeps changing. And I guess the number one thing, and it concerns me once in a while, is when we build a subdivision and then someone comes in and they want to put all Bradford pears, which seems to be a favorite because it doesn't grow tall and everything else. Well, the day that something happens to the Bradford pears, then that whole, so rather than have sugar maples and you know, red maples or something, sugar maples have their problems now also. But the point is, you need to have a lot of different varieties so that when something comes in, you don't lose the whole time, like they did in Worcester with the, when they had
The beetle, whatever it
the
was.
borer that they had.
Yeah.
Are there any markers or indicators that kind of say, all right, this is happening, so you probably should look at some green infrastructure, whether it's some sort of pollution infiltration or, you know, flooding or standing water or something? Are there sort of like, you got these three things happening, you really want to look at some green infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, I think even just pollution levels, and,
Okay.
because the idea is that catching and storing and filtering, actually infiltrating it filters the water. So
Mhm.
even if just one is a particular issue, you'd want to look.
Okay.
Well, to me, the worst thing is generally zoning requires far too many parking spaces is required for a place like Target or Walmart. I know at Bridgewater State University, behind the gymnasium, near the new science building there, they have a catchment area, and it's a green space, and it's a wonderful water filtration system. I mean, I think that we need to rationalize the required parking requirements in big store developments and stuff like that, and maybe incorporate some of these infiltration devices and stuff like that. It wouldn't take away from the parking. And it would also have, instead of having this vast slab of asphalt, you'd be able to have something that would allow some of the water to infiltrate the ground and stuff like that. I think that's something we need to look at in zoning.
Well, we've been doing that, Bruce, because up in Lowe's, I mean, everything they have underneath the ground, and even the place up here on 18, we kept the water going in the right direction, and it just didn't go in the highway.
But there's something that you can do in the parking lot, and I'd urge anyone who's watching this or listening to this, go to Bridgewater State University and go behind the gymnasium science building, and they have this wonderful development, and that was part of the redevelopment. It's the chapel parking lot. I'm a BSU grad, so I know that place in my head. But it's a great example of infiltration and, you know, in getting the water back into the ground and stuff like that. And I think that's something we could do here. I know that this building, for example, when they did this, you should have seen the pipes and everything else that they put under this building for the drainage and everything else. But I think it's something we could do in the parking lots. Make it more attractive.
Definitely.
We have so much wetland in town that we've seen over the years a lot of different coping mechanisms to deal with it. One of the favorites is detention basins. I can point to several of them all around the town. They get built, and that's kind of the end of the conversation. I don't know that they're ever maintained. I don't know that anyone ever looks at what's in them for plantings. And they seem to be a perfect ground for the sort of things you're talking about. But it was kind of a one-size-fits-all solution. Oh, let's put in a detention basin. Well, and then what? And they just kind of get wild growth in them. And I suppose, you know, if some of it's native growth, maybe it's not a bad thing. But I think it's something that needs to be looked at a little more carefully, and instead of just putting on a subdivision plan, oh, we're putting a detention basin. Well, what's that?
Yeah, there's a lot more
How does that
advanced
work?
ideas than those, Doug. You know.
And there's, I don't have any control over that. And I've been to several Conservation Commission meetings, and oh, yeah, okay, we're going to put in a detention basin. End of conversation. And from what you're saying, the need for biodiversity, I think there's an opportunity to do something there.
Well, it's planning education too. I mean, I'm on the board of something called Citizens Planner Training Collaborative. March 16th, we're going to have our conference out at Holy Cross Advert. Anyway, we always have sessions on groundwater, stormwater maintenance and stuff like that. And we have the top people in the world because it's an issue in all the communities in dealing with stormwater and groundwater.
One good thing I've heard of is watching some of the hearings on the planning for Route 18 and the widening. I'm not sure they're doing anything with greens, trees and that, but drainage, they spent a lot of time, a lot of discussion, a lot of money taking drainage out to some of the wetlands down in the old airways.
They needed to.
Yeah.
You know, they're doubling, if not tripling, the paving area.
So there's some good improvements being made with that project in that particular area.
There's three problems with building a road. First one is drainage, the second one is drainage, and the third one is drainage. They told you that in college in the 50s.
Well, what do we hear as planners The worst thing is traffic and making an impervious surface, a pervious surface impervious. Because it always screws up the neighborhood. You build a subdivision next to a neighborhood, and all of a sudden water is going in everybody's cellars because the ground can't absorb the water that the house is built on it. So that's such a key issue.
Well, Bruce, that's why you put it in a detention basin. Come on.
No, but Doug, there's better things than detention basins.
Well, the reason they call them detention basins is because it stops a lot of water coming all at once, and it holds it back, and it's supposed to drain if it's a true detention basin. And that's the reason that they have detention basins. And what you said, I mean, in some areas, you end up getting cat and nine tails and stuff like that, and that's fine, because it's filtering everything else. But what happens if they're not maintained and the trees start growing, then you have a different problem. And then the other problem is that conservation will say, once the trees are growing there, you can't cut them down. So it's a difficult problem.
I think we need to go beyond detention basins and look at other things that accomplish what they do, but not have, I mean, I don't think detention basins are bad. I just think that there are other approaches that could work that are more attractive.
I think the latest trend of the rain gardens, from what I've seen.
Right. And then you'll have people come in and say, well, I'm going to have mosquitoes, and they all get bent out of shape.
And put some bad houses up.
This is a great conversation. I'd love to continue it if you want to, but I just want to respect people's time since we said we'd be done around 8. We appreciate you guys coming and also bearing with us with the technical difficulties. If you'd like to, you can stick around and we can continue this conversation, but we'll say that the meeting officially is adjourned, and if you need to get out of here, please go for it. But we thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just add one more comment, maybe for us to think about as a group. Destinations, just in connectivity, I don't want to forget to say this before I leave. I was thinking about this building, this site, as the middle school, high school, as a destination that, in a way that maybe we didn't. And then when we did this activity, it really sits in like the heart of its location is physically in the center. Before this building existed, when we had 5th and 6th grade at Woodsdale, and then we had 7th and 8th in Crowley, and then we had 9 through 12 here, the population of people who use, because this building is used for the arts, it's used for athletics, it's used for academics, it's used for night meetings. It's really become a destination that people, for a host of many different reasons, are in and out of this any day of the week. You're here on a Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, people are here, all with different purposes. So I know in our small group, it just made me think when we named some of the destinations during that part on connectivity that I would just encourage us to think also about this location in this building itself as really a destination that it's become, where those 3 separate locations have now sort of joined and live here together. So that was one of my takeaways that I thought about.
In the slightly larger area, which includes Riley Field, the bandstand, the library.
It's our municipal complex.
Yeah, for sure.
But it is.
We have a complex, all right.
So we call it, yeah.
Thank you, guys.
That's what
Awesome, thank you.
you-